If I could have your attention, please. We'll resume the program. Can you hear me in the back? You can hear me in the back? Okay, good. So please continue eating, and our servers are bringing the hot food. So please continue to eat, and we will resume our program just for the sake of time. My name is Doug McDaniel. I serve on the board of Young Business Leaders, and we're really glad you're here. If you've not been to one of these events, we do a couple of these a year where we bring in a speaker who typically a business or professional person who just kind of relays their life story to us. And today, you are really in for a treat. YBL stands for Young Business Leaders. It's a bit of a misnomer, but anyway, it's a interdenominational Christian ministry. And really at the core of YBL are our small groups. We have a number of small groups that meet around the city where folks get together, open the Bible, learn about what the Bible has to say about their life. You know, if we're honest, we all struggle in many ways, and it's great to have the fellowship of a small group. And let me just ask you this: if you are currently in a small group or have been in a small group, can I just ask you to raise your hand just to get a sense of? Okay, this is a good number of folks here that are in small groups. So if that possibly has some interest to you, you'll have an opportunity at the end of the program when our executive director, Drew, comes up to tell you about that. In fact, there are some cards on your table, and we would love to have a record of your attendance. You're not signing up for anything if you fill out one of these cards. Well, I take that back. We're going to take the cards up the end. We have two really nice door prizes to give away. C Spire's donated a Yeti cooler, and then BC Rogers Company, Wren and Ivy, has donated something that Drew will tell you about. So let me just encourage you, just for the sake of time, as you finish your meal, to grab the card during the program and just fill out name, address, and that kind of stuff. All right. I am really excited to introduce to you our speaker today. YBL's been in Jackson for 30 years. I don't think we've ever had a speaker who has been portrayed on the big screen by a leading Hollywood actor until today. You'll see very shortly when Mark Whitacre comes to the stage that he is a dead ringer from Matt Damon, who played him in the movie The Informant. And anyway, Mark is from Ohio. He received his undergraduate and graduate degrees from The Ohio State University. Is that how you say that, Mark? Okay. And also, he received a PhD from Cornell University in nutritional biochemistry. Shortly after that, he was involved with a few companies, but ended up joining a company called Archer Daniels Midland. Anybody in the Midwest has heard the name of that company. It's not as known here in the South. It's a multi-billion-dollar food company, sometimes called ADM. And Mark was a young man in his early 30s when he joined there, and his capabilities were recognized. He became the president of one of their leading divisions, and quickly was moving up the ladder. Was often touted by Wall Street analyst as the next president of Archer Daniels Midland. I'll let Mark tell you what happened there, but today Mark's vice president of a company called Coca-Cola Consolidated. That's the bottler out of Charlotte. He and his sweet wife Ginger, who has joined us today, are parents of 3 children and 2 dogs. We had occasion to have dinner last night with Mark and Ginger, and let me just say Mark's very busy. He speaks all the time, and they are just as enthusiastic to be here, and we're so appreciative they've come. So I wish you would join me in giving Mark Whitacre a warm Mississippi welcome.
Thank you, Doug, for that warm welcome. And Ginger and I are both honored to be here and met several of you before it started, but I hope we get to meet a lot of the rest of you here as we finish up here today. But we're going to share our journey that's happened it started when I was 32. That was 5 years ago, by the way, when I was 32. No, that was 35 years ago is what it was. And so we're closer to the end of our life than the beginning. But we've learned a lot during this journey, and that's what we want to share with you today. And basically, as Doug mentioned, I got my PhD in biochemistry in 1983, and at that time, the biotech industry was exploding. I mean, there was 10 jobs for every PhD scientist at that time in '83. It's when Genentech just started, and all the pharmaceutical companies were starting biotech divisions, and probably not a better time really in history than that period of time to be in biotech. And by the way, I grew up in a Christian home near Cincinnati, Ohio, and my parents forced me to go to church. They did, and my mom just passed, Lily, just a month ago, and she was 91, and she was worried. I was the only child out of 4 to go to college at all. She said I went and got a degree for all of them. Had 8 years scholarship out of her 4 brothers and sisters. I was the only one went to college. Had scholarship for all 8 years. My parents did not have to pay a dime for my education, not even for living expenses. But my biggest worry for my mom was, would she recognize me when I got out of college? Because she said, I wish you would have got a scholarship to a Christian college. But I did not. I did not apply to Christian college. The sciences, I wanted to go into a secular university, and so I had scholarships at Ohio State, and then the Ivy League at Cornell in New York. And I was 22 years old as a PhD student at Cornell. The average age of Cornell PhD starting is 32, and I was 22. So I was about 10 years younger than all the others in my class. And I can remember never met one Christian professor in 8 years of college, not one. But I had plenty of them, especially in the Ivy League, say that if you're a Christian, you cannot be a PhD scientist. I had one in physics, a professor during my PhD said, if you're a Christian, you're better off not to be in my class. And when you hear that for 8 years, I started telling all my friends at Cornell that my parents are Christians because they didn't go to college and they don't know better. That's really what I thought during that time. So like my mom's worry was, would she recognize her son? When I got out of college, her nightmare ended up being true. She did not recognize me when I got out of Cornell. I got caught up in the world, graduating, like I said, at age 25 from Cornell. Biotech industry exploded. I joined a company called Purina, which is owned by Nestle's now. And within a year, I was living in Frankfurt, Germany for almost 4 years. You had to learn a second language during your PhD program, and I learned German. So they had us living in Frankfurt, Germany for 4 years. And this is a good example, especially for a lot of your young ones out here. And I see there's a lot of young. And by the way, I'm 67, so I see someone even 60 as young. But show me your mentor, I'll show your future. And I tell you, I had some great mentors in my career when I was in Germany. And then I was doing joint ventures with this company called ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. Doug mentioned them. And ADM, by the way, is this is 1989, so you're talking 35 years ago. ADM, a $70 billion company, 32,000 employees, and number 56 on the Fortune 500. This is a Fortune 50 company. So I was vice president of a company called Degussa, second largest chemical company in Frankfurt, and for 4 years, and I was doing joint ventures with ADM. And I can remember the CEO at ADM, who was 75 at the time, the president was 71 at the time, and I was 32 doing these joint ventures with him. I was 7 years out of college. And I can remember the CEO say, Mark, why don't you just join us at ADM? He said, I see a lot of bureaucracy here at Degussa. I think we could build these plants easier together with you without the company you work for. And I said, no, I've got great mentors. I was 2 years with them in the United States, 4 years in Germany. There's no way I'm ever leaving. And then he said, how much you earn, Mark? And we had Deutschmarks then. I know it's euros now, but this is 1989. So it was in Deutschmarks. And I kind of calculated it with bonuses, stock options, base salary, all of it together, and said about a $400,000 in US dollars. And he said, well, Mark, I'll give you a $350,000 base salary, and I'll give you bonus that are attainable. I mean, goals that are attainable where you can earn $3 million a year. And I said, where do I sign? After I spent an hour telling him I'm never leaving. And so I signed, they put an employment agreement together, and I signed, and I started working for them, moved from Frankfurt, Germany to Decatur, Illinois. That's quite a move, by the way, after 4 years in Europe. I remember coming home and telling Ginger, by the way, who was a Christian at that time, her mom was real sick, 10 months in the hospital, and Ginger became a Christian, sitting by her mom's side for almost 10 months. Her mom was only 52 and almost died, and her life was different after that incident that she went through. But Ginger became a Christian during that time. So Ginger's life changed already for a few years before this. And I remember telling Ginger, I said, Ginger, you can't be a Christian. I'm a PhD scientist from an Ivy League school. And I'll never forget, she said, Mark, you can take that PhD and shove it. And I'm telling you, God exists, and Jesus is the Son of God. I've spent 10 months in the hospital, 5-6 hours a day with my mom. And she said, Jesus exists. God does exist, Mark. And I said, Ginger, I'm a scientist, and I think there's scientific proof that he doesn't. Never met one Christian professor in my entire life. And she said, Mark, you're wrong. They're all wrong. God exists, and I'm praying for you, Mark, and I'm praying for you daily. And she never stopped praying for me, that's for sure, even though it took me about 10 years later to get to the point where she was at that time. So I joined ADM and moved, and I remember, never forget, when I said we're moving to Decatur, Illinois, she said, you didn't do it for the money, did you? And I said, Ginger, an opportunity of a lifetime. We're going to make tenfold what we're making. She said, Mark, I don't care what you make. I just want you home with our family and with our 3 children. It's not about income. I want you home. I want my husband back. I want the husband I fell in love with in high school, because we met in 7th and 8th grade. Went to all our proms together in high school and been married now for 45 years this year. And it's a miracle of God that she stayed with me. And I think you're going to agree with me when I tell you the rest of this journey, that she hung in there and stayed in our marriage with what I put my family through. So we moved. So I said, no, I didn't do it for the money. I did it for the money. I can tell you, that's for sure. When it was tenfold, I said, where do I sign? We're in Decatur, Illinois. The 75-year-old CEO comes back to my office, and it's my first week there, and he said, Mark, you're divisional president of the biotech division, our fastest growing division. You're corporate vice president of the whole company. He's 75, the president's 71. He said, you're ranked number 4. There was a vice chairman about 10 years older than me. He said, you're number 4 in the company, and the 7 top executives each get their own jet, and I'm going to take you out to our hangar in Decatur, Illinois, about 3 hours south of Chicago, and I'm going to show you your plane. And I had a Falcon 50 given to me my first week. And I worked there in that position for almost 8 years. And I remember the 3rd week, there at the company, he come back and said, Mark, you moved your family from Frankfurt yet? I said, no, we're looking at homes. It was October of '89 when I started. We're letting our kids finish school in December. We'll move around Christmas. That way they start a new school in January in the American school system. And he made a comment. He said, won't you buy my home? And I said, tell me about your home. This CEO, by the way, a billionaire. Back at that time, he was almost like a Bill Gates. This is, keep in mind, 30 years ago. And 1989, 35 years ago. So he owned 5% of ADM, the largest single shareholder of a $70 billion company, owned 5%. So I said, tell me about your home. He said, well, it's 13,000 square feet. It's got horse riding stables where your kids ride inside in the wintertime in an arena. It's got 15 acres. It's got 3 golf greens on the property. It's got an 8-car garage. It's got a huge swimming pool. And he said, it's a beautiful home. And I said, I'm hearing this, and I'm 7 years out of college. I said, well, I said, I'm only 7 years out of college. I couldn't afford a home like that yet. And he said, nonsense, Mark. I'll give you a startup bonus today. That'll be the down payment. It's my third week working there. So he gave me a down payment. I bought his home, a 13,000 square foot house, 15 acres, 8-car garage. And I'm telling you, it was a mansion. He lived in it for 35 years. And John Daniels, who founded Archer Daniels Midland 115 years earlier, built that home. I mean, it was a mansion. So that was the home we lived in the entire time we were at ADM. And I'm telling you, I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber. I mean, I had a mansion, an 8-car garage, a Falcon 50, and I was there 3 weeks at that company. And I remember telling Ginger, I said, Ginger, I know you believe in God, but I'm telling you something. If there's a heaven, this is it. And we're in it. She said, I'm telling you, Mark, this is not heaven. This is not heaven at all. And she said, I hope you made the right decision. I just hope you made the right decision, because there's something that don't feel right to me about this. That was my first couple of weeks. Ginger was already saying that. So we moved in that home, lived in that home. Be honest with you, looking back, the fact I got a startup bonus to buy his house, that I probably wouldn't have got a startup bonus if it wasn't him selling his house. We probably should have went to prison for that, being a publicly traded company, looking back. So in a way, I got to the fork of the road my third week at work there and was already on the wrong track. So then what happened, I'm a couple years there, and I'm caught up in it. I mean, I'm addicted to it. I'm with base salary and stock options and bonuses, it's $3 million a year. 1989, that's like $10 million a year today. I feel, what's a 32-year-old do that's full of himself with a 8-car garage? You fill it up. I had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedes. It was on. Bon Jovi, look out. Here I come. And I remember telling Ginger, she was driving a 10-year-old. When she moved back, her dad gave her a car. She had a 10-year-old Grand Cherokee. And I remember telling Ginger, I said, Ginger, I got a red Ferrari with this month's bonus. Let me buy you a yellow Ferrari next month. And Ginger looked at me. She said, I don't want a yellow Ferrari. I want to be a good steward for God. I didn't even know what that meant. That was like hearing Latin to me. So I went and bought me a yellow Ferrari. Like I said, I was caught up. I was hooked. It was like being hooked on cocaine or crack. I mean, the addiction to greed exists, and I had it. And I was liking it, and I was loving it. And so a couple years later, the CEO comes back to my office. Now he's 77, 2 years older. I'm 34, 2 years older. And he says, Mark, we're getting a lot of pressure on secession. Because of his age, the president now 73, the CEO now 77, we're going to have to make some announcements on succession planning. We won't do anything for a couple years. We'll just keep mentoring you, but we're going to have to make some announcements. And they put in Fortune magazine, it was front cover, that I was going to be the next COO and president of ADM, the 56th largest company in America, a $70 billion company with 32,000 employees. Boy, when they did that, most people were probably wrapping fish in that magazine. I had that framed in every office, my home office, my work office. I mean, I was caught up. I would step on my own grandma probably at that point to get that job, because I thought someday when I'm COO the next couple of years, well, only a few years after that, someday I'll be the CEO, because everybody that lived in this home I live in has been a CEO for the last 80 years. So I felt like I lived in the CEO's home, and I'll be CEO at some point. But he did came back an hour later. He said, Mark, I know you've been here a couple of years. You're part of the family now. We trust you completely. We're going to start bringing you into some things that we've not shared with you. I thought that was interesting, being there 2 years, divisional president and corporate vice president of the company. And he started sharing with me how they meet with their competitors, and they were fixing prices of some of the food ingredients that go into all your foods. ADM was the largest food additive company in the world. You buy a Kellogg's, a Pillsbury, a Kraft, an orange juice, an iced tea. It's difficult to buy a food or beverage that doesn't have something from ADM in it. Largest food additive company in the world. And I said, well, that's not legal. You're fixing prices and colluding with your competitors and breaking antitrust law. He said, Mark, I'm telling you, everybody's doing it. He said, we've been doing it for 12 years, and this is what the commodity business does. If you're in the commodity business, this is what everybody does. And I thought, well, I'm only 34, 9 years out of college. He's 35 years as a CEO and a billionaire. He knows a lot more than I do. So I said, yeah, if that's the way business is done, I'll learn it. I'll be mentored how to do it. And he said, you're not just going to learn it, Mark. Eventually, you're going to run it. You're going to do this for a year or two, and you're going to lead this international cartel. So eventually be the leader of it as they got older, him now being 77. So I started learning and mentoring and going to price fixing meetings in Hong Kong and Singapore and Dubai and Switzerland and all around the world. And we had plants all around the world too. ADM's a global company. So I started going to those. And 7 months later, Ginger and I are having a conversation, November 5th, 1992. And I'll never forget this day. And she said, Mark, something's, she said, I've known you since you're in 8th grade. Something you're not telling me these last few months. And I said, Ginger, there's nothing. Everything's normal. Just all the things we're doing, just normal. I'm going to be the next COO of ADM. She said, I know that. You got that framed and in your home office here. So I know that. But she said, Mark, something's not right. You're on the phone at all these hours at night, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. And I said, well, Ginger, I have to be on the phone at night because 8 o'clock at night is 8 o'clock in the morning in Singapore, in South Korea, in Southeast Asia, in Japan. And she said, well, why would you be talking to Asia at 8 o'clock at night? And I said, well, I'm talking to, and I named some companies, Ajinomoto, Kiwahako, and C1. I named them. She said, well, that's your competitors. Why are you talking to them? I said, well, they're teaching me and mentoring me to eventually take over a practice that we're doing. I didn't call it a price fixing scheme. A practice that we're doing that we're just working with our competitors and trying to be more friendly with them instead of fighting with them. She said, Mark, is that legal? I said, Ginger, it's not legal, but everybody does it. If you're in the commodity business, this is the way business is done. She said, Mark, this sounds like a fraud. How much does the company earn? I said, about an extra $1 billion a year. We're $70 billion in revenue, $4 billion in pre-tax profit, about $1 billion, at least hundreds of millions, but close to $1 billion a year from working with our competitors. 25% of your profit is a fraud? She said, Mark, I don't know if I can live with this. She said, who pays for this extra $1 billion a year? I said, well, basically when the consumers go to the grocery store and they buy $50 worth of groceries, they could buy a lot of groceries then in 1992 for $50 because this was 1992 at the time, November 5th. And I said, they pay $5 extra. So they may pay $55 instead of $50 because when Kellogg's or Pillsbury or Kraft or a beverage company or Tyson Foods or Purdue Farms, when they pay extra for the ingredients, their profit margin is built in. The consumers pays that. She said, you mean my grandma on Social Security, $800 a month, is paying this, and we live in a mansion with an 8-car garage driving Ferraris? I said, Mark, I don't know if I can live with this. And then she said she was going to go pray about it. When she told me she was going to pray about it, I knew I was in trouble. There's nothing that ever turned out good for me when she said she was going to pray about it. So I was a nervous wreck. She went and prayed for about an hour and a half, and she was in her Bible. She's heavily involved in Monday night Bible study, a Thursday night Bible study with the women, our church. She forced me to go to church just like my parents did, and it was one ear and out the other ear for me. I just kept thinking of the business and what the next bonus size was going to be and when I was going to get it. And she came back about an hour and a half later, and she said, Mark, God led me to a decision. She said, we've been studying the book of Esther, studying about Esther this week. And she said, I've been reading Esther as I've been praying about it. And God led me to a decision. She said, you have to turn yourself in to federal authorities. She said, think about it, Mark. You're 7 months involved. It's been going on for 12 years. You're even at the company only for 2 years. What a perfect time to stop this fraud from happening. I said, Ginger, the CEO, is a billionaire. He's best friends with President Clinton. He went to President Nixon's funeral on President Clinton's plane. This man is powerful. They will destroy us. It'd be like going up against like an Elon Musk or Bill Gates today. I said, they will destroy us. She said, I prayed about that, Mark. God will protect us. I said, Ginger, this is breaking antitrust laws. You go to federal prison for this. I got a CEO that would destroy us. I got the likelihood I could go to federal prison. She said, Mark, if you go to prison, I'll stay with you. But we're going to do it. We're going to do the right thing. I don't think you'll go to prison because you're only involved 7 months, but we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to do it today. And we had an argument, like an argument we've not had in 45 years, but I've known her since she was in the 7th grade, and she always wins. And we were literally sitting with the FBI that very day. I don't know how many of you ever went and told the FBI you're stealing $1 billion a year, but I can tell you firsthand, that's an interesting reaction. That reached Janet Reno, the Attorney General at the time. It reached William Sessions, the Director of the FBI at the time. This became the largest antitrust collusion, international cartel, price-fixing case in U.S. history. $1 billion a year theft from 11 companies. So that's $11 billion a year theft for 12 years in a row. We were sitting there with the FBI, and Ginger's there by my side, as she always has been. And they said, now what are we here for? And I said, you got all these drug dealers in Decatur. I don't feel safe. I'm divisional president of one of the biggest companies in the world. I don't feel safe here. And he said, I understand that, but what are we here for? And I said, you got all these drug dealers in Decatur. He said, that's not what we're here to talk about. And Ginger said, we're here to talk about fraud. And then he said, what kind of fraud? And I said, you got all these drug dealers in Decatur, Illinois. I used that line about 6 times, but it didn't work, by the way. I can tell you firsthand it didn't work. And Ginger said, a huge fraud. He said, how much? Ginger said, $1 billion. He said, $1 million. She said, no, $1 billion. How long's this been going on? I said, you got all these drug dealers. I can't believe you're not solving all this crime in Decatur. I don't feel safe here. And I'm with one of the largest companies in the world. And she said, it's been going on 12 years. He got all the truth out of Ginger quickly. And after 4 hours sitting with the FBI, November 5th, 1992, I had a choice to either be arrested or wear a wire to go after the kingpins that's been doing it for 12 years that were teaching me how to do it. Well, I sure didn't want to be arrested at 34 years of age and being divisional president of one of the biggest companies in the world. So I said the only choice I had, be arrested or wear a wire. So I said I'd wear a wire, not knowing what I was getting into. The next morning, 3 FBI agents met me at 6 in the morning, shaved my chest, put microphones on my chest, had a tape recorder on my back with an athletic band wrapped around to hold the recorder, had another tape recorder in a briefcase and another tape recorder in a notebook. And they said, Mark, it's only about 6 weeks. We'll have this all wrapped up in 6 weeks. I met those FBI agents at 6 o'clock in the morning, every Monday through Friday for 3 years. It wasn't 6 weeks. It was 3 years, 1992 to 1995. As we were doing the price-fixing meetings, and as I was taping, we were taping a product called lysine, about $1 billion market in the amino acid market, and someone would brag and say, yeah, we do that on citric acid. We made $250 million on that last year. And then someone would brag a couple meetings later, yeah, we do that on sodium gluconate, and we made X on that. It became 11 different cases because everybody bragging about their illegal activity. And I just wanted them to shut up, quit talking about their illegal activity because I wanted to get this over with. But I wore that wire 1992 to 1995. The FBI would tell me there's a documentary on my website, and I think it mentions that in the bio there on your pamphlet, on your program. In this documentary, it's with the 3 real FBI agents. They weren't real happy with the movie, how it portrayed the story. So they did a documentary 2 months after the movie, the real FBI agents, on Discovery Channel. They even brought Ginger and I into part of it too. But these 3 FBI agents, as they say in the documentary, they told me a couple times a week, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. If they catch you wearing a wire, your life is in danger. And to hear that 2 or 3 times a week for 3 years took a tremendous toll. They show in the documentary, and they have actors reenact it, they show in that Discovery Channel documentary, which is on markwhitacre.com, my website, me blowing the driveway off at 3 in the morning with a suit and tie on during thunderstorms with a gas leaf blower. At 3 in the morning during a thunderstorm. I was falling apart. And I even had my microphones during that. I mean, I was falling apart. I was having a nervous breakdown. I thought, what are they going to do with me when they find out one of the most powerful men in the world How will we ever survive this? And it's all Ginger's fault. It's all Ginger's fault. And that just kept going through my mind day in and day out from 3 years, from age 34 to about 37 at that time. So there was a green lamp that followed us around the world. And this green lamp made the video. It did. Because they wanted to show, they knew they were going up against one of the largest companies in the world. So the prosecutors wanted to show a jury what was going on, not just the audio tapes I was making. And this green lamp looks like it came from a yard sale. I would tell the FBI where the meeting's going to happen. They would be in the next room, the next conference room, and they could remote control on that camera and zoom in whoever was talking. And this green lamp, it had a camera. So I'm making the audio, the green lamp's making the video. And that green lamp was at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, $1,000 a night hotel with 11 guys fixing prices. 3 weeks later, that same green lamp was at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong. Same 11 guys, 5 feet from him. A few weeks after that, it was at the Sheraton in Maui, Hawaii. Same 11 guys. Then it was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago. Same 11 guys. That green lamp was at 2 or 3 meetings a month. The same 11 guys for 3 years. I thank God we did not have a woman criminal among us. Because if we had a woman criminal among us, a woman would have said, that green lamp has followed us around the world. But what it showed me is greed blinds you. We were all making millions of dollars, each of us. The company's making billions of dollars, each individual making millions of dollars, and they didn't see what was 5 feet from them until there was a 7-week trial in Chicago. 30 people went to prison, 4 from ADM alone, and all the other companies too. And when that green lamp was brought into the courtroom, they all smacked their head. Now they remember the green lamp. A little bit late by that point, because now all the evidence was built and everybody was convicted. Now, right before the raid, the FBI came to me and said, Mark, we're going to do a raid tomorrow. We're going to send about 70 agents to ADM's headquarters, and we're going to get all the paperwork and all the computers to basically support what you have on all the tapes. We're going to raid your office too, Mark, to protect you, to make you look like you're a defendant, to protect me. Because if they don't raid my office, it looks like I'm the informant. So they raided all the office, but they said this. They said, Mark, right now, we're telling you this company is going to find out very soon that you're working with us. And they're going to come after you with everything they have. Everything. You're going to be the enemy of the company. So we're telling you right now, if there's something you've not told us these last 3 years, we've given you full immunity for wearing a wire. And if you tell us now something you've done, we'll give you full immunity. But you got to tell us, Mark. I thought about it. No, there's nothing really to tell you. He said, Mark, we're telling you full immunity if you tell us everything. Because if the company brings it up, we're going to have to charge you. But if you bring it up, we can say that's part of your cooperation agreement. You already told us that crime happened. And so I didn't tell them. The day they did that raid, the next day the ADM learned very quickly that I was informed. They were very connected in the U.S. government, very good friends with President Clinton, so they learned very quickly that I was informant. They called the FBI and said, well, look, Mark Whitacre's no white knight informant. He stole $9 million from us the same time he's working for you guys. The FBI shows up at my house. They said, Mark, what about this $9 million? I said, well, look, I showed him my stock options. I had it all in a file for him. This is what the company owes me 11 months from now. I have stock options worth $9 million. Mark, that's 11 months from now. I said, well, I got fired already for being an informant. I won't be able to exercise these. So I wrote checks to myself for $9 million. Mark, we told you to get full immunity if you tell us everything. This is going to blow that immunity agreement. You can't cash stock options 11 months early. You're in trouble, Mark. You're in trouble. The immunity agreement's now off the table. But we're going to go to the prosecutors. We should have never had you wear a wire for 3 years. And we're going to go to the prosecutors and get you the best plea agreement we can get you. It won't be immunity, but we'll get you the best plea agreement because we should have never had you wear a wire for 3 years. We don't even have our own agents wear a wire. Matter of fact, the guideline today by the FBI is not to wear a wire longer than a year because of what happens when you wear them this long. in terms of you fall apart. You have a nervous breakdown. You don't know the difference between right and wrong when you're wearing a wire for 3 years, every day, 10 hours a day. You go to the restroom, you're on tape. Your mom calls, you're on tape. Your sister calls you, they're on tape. Someone walks in your office, they're on tape. Every day for 3 years. So they went to the prosecutor, said this guy helped solve an $11 billion crime. A year for 12 years this was ongoing. And this guy wore a wire and risked his life for 3 years. The prosecutors agreed. Said, yeah, we agree. He helped us. We got to do something for him, but we got to punish him a little bit because ADM's going to go to the newspapers, and there were newspapers back then. He's going to go to the newspapers, and we got to punish him. We can't give him full immunity. So we'll give him a Martha Stewart sentence, 6-month sentence at a white-collar camp, no fence, no razor wire, and 6 months he goes in at 38, comes out at 38. FBI told me the deal. My lawyers called me in Chicago, said, Mark, you got 48 hours, sign this, 6 months, deal of a lifetime. I looked at the FBI, said, or my lawyer, I said, I don't know if I can do 6 months. Ginger sitting by my side, as always, she said, Mark, I'm begging you to sign this. Let's put it behind you. Let's put it behind all of us. I looked at Ginger, said, it's all your fault. You're the reason I'm in this mess. I've had to wear a wire for 3 years. Now you've put me in prison, Ginger. You've ruined my life, and I'm going to do the opposite you want me to do. And I ripped up the plea agreement, threw it in the trash can, fired the lawyer, who's a judge now, fired the lawyer, hired lawyers. One of them was Donald Trump's lawyer, hired lawyers the next day, fought the case in court for 3 years, and got 8.5 years instead. My own worst enemy. I went from immunity to a 6-month deal to 8.5 years in federal prison. Making impulse decisions, trying to make my own decisions, not listen to wise counsel, if anybody, not praying to God. These are just Mark Whitacre making decisions. And I went from wearing a wire for 3 years now to 8.5 years in prison. So now I'm not going at 38, coming out at 38. I've already fought the case, 3 years in courts. Now I'm 40 and coming out at 48. I pulled my car in one of those garages, wrote a 17-page letter to Ginger and my kids, and I tried to kill myself. I could not imagine going to federal prison for 8 years. I thought, I'm not going to have a family when I get out. What family would stay with all the mistakes I made? Who's going to hire somebody, even with an Ivy League PhD? I'm a convicted felon coming out at 48. Life is over, and I tried to kill myself. I was hospitalized for a month. I was treated for post-traumatic stress disorder and clinical depression, and some of the things happen when you wear a wire for 3 years, and I just wanted to die. We sent home, heavily medicated for a month, heavily treated. The judge gave me 7 months before I had to show up in prison to get back on my feet and get my health in order. Someone read about me in the newspaper, and he was called part of a group called, very similar to YBL, called CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection. His name was Ian Howes. Stranger, read about me in the newspaper, showed up at my house. He said, Mark, this is going to be the beginning of your life. You're going to find your true purpose in your life. And I said, Ian, I'm going to prison for 8.5 years. He said, Mark, I'm telling you, it's the beginning of your life. And he said, I want to go through a Bible study called Operation Timothy with you, and I want to work with you and mentor you before you go to prison 7 months from now. Most of my friends were running, and I tell you, I welcomed for somebody to show up. But I did tell Ian, I said, Ian, I got 8 years of college telling me there's no God, including an Ivy League PhD in the sciences. He said, that's okay, Mark. Let's just go through this and see what God does. So he started discipling me 6-7 hours a week for 7 months. He started giving me a little hope, but I had 8 years of college that was blocking from me believing everything he said. Then my second week in prison, Chuck Colson showed up. I don't know how many of you ever heard of Chuck Colson, but he was the White House counsel for President Nixon. And in the 70s, he went to federal prison for Watergate. Matter of fact, President Nixon was going to go to prison too, but he was pardoned by Ford. But all the others that worked for President Nixon, 12 of them, Attorney General, Director of the FBI, White House counsel, which Chuck Colson was, they all went to federal prison. And Chuck Colson became a Christian, and it changed his life. And 20 years later, he read about me in the Washington Post. And he showed up at my prison. And by the way, Yazoo, Mississippi is where I was at. And Ginger actually was coming to Jackson. She wanted to live where I was at in prison, and she was looking at houses in Jackson. in this Jackson here. And the warden came to me after about 5 or 6 weeks in Jackson. Ginger was coming about every other weekend at that point because it was a pretty good distance from her in Chapel Hill, North Carolina at the time. And the warden said, Mark, this is a low security and we got to get you in a camp because you're in a white collar crime. We have you in the wrong place. And Mark, I've read about your case and I read where you wore a wire for 3 years and I'm going to let you choose where you want to go. And he showed me the list of prisons, and I talked to Ginger about it. Ginger had a sister living in South Carolina, so we chose a prison in Edgefield, South Carolina, near her sister. So I was only in Yazoo for about 6 weeks, but if they would have had a camp like they have now, that's where I would have been. That's where I would have been. They do have a white-collar camp now, but they didn't at that time. So we moved to Edgefield, South Carolina. Chuck Colson, that second week in prison, he showed up, and he says, Mark, he went to Brown. He said, you went to Cornell, Mark. Did you hear a lot about God? And I said, yeah, I heard a lot about God, that God doesn't exist. He said, that's what he heard of Brown in the Ivy League too, where he went. He said, Mark, do you think there's a scientist that believes in God? And I said, no, there's not a scientist in the world that believes in God. He pulled an article out by Albert Einstein, and Albert Einstein said only God could create the universe, only God could create man, and the Big Bang Theory is impossible. I said, well, Albert Einstein's a pretty smart guy. They sure didn't teach me that at Cornell. And then he left me a memoir by Sir Isaac Newton, where Sir Isaac Newton wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. And I said, they sure didn't teach me that at Cornell. Then he started, next time he came, he brought an article by Francis Collins that wrote about, that's a Christian, that did the human genome, who's a Christian. I said, they sure didn't teach me that at Cornell. And it's just article after article and book after book. I remember some of these articles, a book by that really got me on my knees by a scientist named Don Byerly, who was an atheist, and he wanted to prove God didn't exist. And after 10 years studying it, this PhD biologist in Minnesota, who's still alive today, wrote a book called Surprised by Faith. He became a Christian and said God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. And he was an atheist. I've read that book, and I remember reading where Don Byerly said, for example, they said, well, we evolved from ape. If you evolved from ape, ape wouldn't be born today. And 1,000 years from now, ape's still going to be born. So their DNA is similar to man, but we didn't evolve because ape still exists today. So it's impossible. And then he said, you even look at the sight that we have, just the eyesight. Well, how can we come through evolution from Darwinism, for example? Darwin says we evolved from a single cell amoeba that don't even have an eye. And the sight in the eyes that we have, and all the other tissues that we have, and the brain that we have that has emotional ability. It's impossible to become from amoeba, he said. And it was science after science and historical evidence after historical evidence that God does exist. Even they talked about you move Jupiter 6 inches. The sun would completely consume the earth if you moved it 6 inches. Well, if our planets were all by the Big Bang Theory just thrown up in the sky, how would they be in that perfect place without a creator? So I got down on my knees on June 4th, 1998, the first time in my life, and said, God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. And it changed my life forever. My 3rd month in prison. And Chuck Colson continued to disciple me where I grew in my faith. And Ginger came that following weekend. And I told her, I said, Ginger, I was in tears. I said, I've got no one to blame but myself. God exists and Jesus is the Son of God. And I have no doubt. And I've made so many mistakes. And I don't blame you for being upset. And I can't imagine why you would stay. But it's all my fault, Ginger. And I would see our marriage started reconciling at that point. And then our 3 children heard me say that, and they started changing. And they're all walking with the Lord and walking with God today. It changed our whole family. And then I started helping guys get their GEDs and Spanish guys how to read better English and speak better, and read English and write better English and speak better English. And then I helped some of them get their 2-year degrees in college. I was $3 million a year for 8 years, and I was $20 a month for 8 years. And they were the most productive years of my life in federal prison at $20 a month. Because the first time in my life I was helping somebody else besides myself. and instead of myself. It changed my life. And I was learning heating and air conditioning in prison because I knew I had to make a living for my family. Who's going to hire someone with a convicted felon with all that education? I thought I had no career opportunities. And I started learning heating and air conditioning for 8 years. I know I could make a good living for my family. And some biotech CEOs were reading about me in the newspaper. And they started showing up and having me review their patents. Sometimes I didn't have time to be in prison. I had so many patents to review. And I helped them improve their patents. And 4 of those companies offered me a job the day I got out. And I joined one with a Christian CEO because I didn't want to fall in that trap of greed. And I started off like someone right out of college at age 48, started all over again. I became the COO and president of that company with 4 promotions, and I was the number 2 of a cancer research biotech company in California for 10 years. And I'm still on their advisory board, still today. And then I joined CBMC as their COO, the very group that first reached out to me. And now I've been 7 years with Coca-Cola Consolidated. We're a faith-based company. We're the largest faith-based publicly traded company. We have a chaplain in every plant, chaplain for every 200 employees, for 18,000 employees, 17,600, just shy of 18,000. We have 127 prayer groups, Bible studies. I lead 16 prayer groups myself. And I'm vice president of culture and care. I'm not doing pricing. I'm not doing marketing. I'm vice president of culture and care. It has been the best season of my life. I'm the ministry arm of a publicly traded company, and it has transformed our company. Our retention rates, our average recommits and salvations was 113 per month in 2023 of recommits and salvations of our employees. And we're well over 200 a month for 2024. More salvations, recommits than most churches. Best season I've ever had in my life. I am a PhD scientist from an Ivy League school, and God exists, and Jesus is the Son of God, and I have no doubt in my life. And I am going to share what God has done in my life until I go to heaven, because God does exist. Those companies that were the victims, the largest victim of the case, ADM had to pay $3 billion back to the victims in class action suits, $400 million alone to the Coca-Cola system. I work for the major victim of who I stole from, for the corn syrup that goes in beverage. I work in vice president of a company who I stole from 35 years ago. Miracle of God. Our marriage, 45 years married. Miracle of God. Those companies were so appreciative of Ginger starting this case and stopping what was going on for 12 years. They gave her a whistleblower reward and financed her the 8 years I was in federal prison and put my kids through college. Put Ginger back in college at age 40 to be a school teacher. She was teacher of the year of our whole city. The companies I stole from took care of my family. Today, Ginger says, and she's done many interviews herself, thank God. She said murder was an option, but divorce wasn't when I took that 6 months plea agreement, threw away. She said murder was an option. But she said now she looks back, thank God I didn't sign that 6-month sentence. She said I would have came out the same greedy man I went in, but as broken as I was, and I had to be broken, she said God gave me exactly what I needed, which was 8 years in federal prison. I think 2 years would have been enough, but I agree 6 months would have not have been. It's a miracle of God that our family stands here today and that our marriage survived and that I work for a company I stole from, and I don't take it lightly. God exists, and Jesus is the Son of God, and I'm going to serve him until I go to heaven. Thank you for having me here today, and God bless all of you. Thank you.